Well, hello again. Hope you had a good week. This week we're going to continue sharing you the various steps on my spiritual journey over the last 25 years. And this section followed a few months after these next two steps, after my initial mystical experience, which I've discussed in the last couple presentations. So anyway, it was a few months later, and I was going to study with Dr. William Baldwin again in an intermediate 2-week training. And the 2-week training involved my being introduced to, or further introduced to, A Course in Miracles. I had first encountered A Course in Miracles through Marianne Williamson's book, Return to Love. One of my patients had read it and recommended it to me. So at the end of the training with Dr. Baldwin in his spiritually based therapy, I had this experience about 4 o'clock in the morning. I was awakened and I began to feel as if I were going to levitate. I began to feel like the molecules in my body were changing, and I was lifting up through the sheets, and I was really excited. Now, to my left, there was a sliding glass door in this hotel. I was on the ground floor, and I saw the silhouette of a huge dark figure standing there, about the height of the 8-foot ceiling. And I couldn't be bothered by it being there. I was too excited about the idea of levitating. And as I began to feel that, I began to feel myself, as I again say, the molecules of my body felt like they were changing, and I was going to be able to lift up. And I felt myself for a second lose my balance. Now, for the whole training, Dr. Baldwin and his wife Judith had emphasized in dealing with these dark entities, which I mentioned before in the previous presentation. You were to first, if there was any fear, you were to initially eliminate the fear. And if that meant putting your little hand in the hand of the big hand of your higher self, or in the language of the Course, of the Holy Spirit, that's what you did. So my version of that involved Reiki, and I said, as I felt myself losing my balance, I imagined saying, with this sacred symbol, the master symbol of Reiki, with this sacred symbol, I attuned myself to the light and love of the Holy Spirit. No sooner did I say that, and suddenly this dark entity tears down the length of the room. It was a long room from where the sliding glass door was to another window and the front door, and it was like streak lines in a cartoon, where this thing just sort of, an animated feature, just shot down and out through the door. I mean, out through the wall, actually, next to the window. And then I saw all these lights began to shine into the room. And then, as if everybody in the hotel had gotten up and taken their cars, and turned them around and had shown their headlights into the room. And then I heard a barely audible whoosh, as if something had taken off. So I go back to sleep. And when I awoke, I contacted my friend and I said, this is what happened. And she was the way she described herself was as a naturally trance medium, that she had that capacity for to go into trance naturally and to be able to contact presumably other dimensions and other beings not seen in physical form. So she said, oh, that entity is back. And of course it was daylight. I couldn't see anything, but I could sense something. And she said, he was saying you were too much trouble to deal with, that he was coming back for me. And then with that, I thought, no, you weren't. And in my mind, I said, again, with this sacred symbol, I attuned myself to the light and love of the Holy Spirit. And as soon as I said that, her head snapped back as her eyes were closed in trance. And she said, something just scared the hell out of him. Now, flash ahead 2 years, and I'm in Barnes & Noble, waiting for a friend, and looking for something to read. And this friend happened to be another Reiki practitioner. And I'm looking for something to read, and I just happened to see next to the area where you could get coffee and food and so forth, was a book called Passports to the Cosmos by Dr. John Mack, head of the psychiatric department at the Harvard Medical School. And it was a book about his experiences with people who had been abducted, claiming to have been, well, they didn't claim, they sometimes didn't remember. They had symptoms, and he regressed them hypnotically, and they reported an encounter. Some people were conscious of remembering an encounter with what was felt to be extraterrestrials and to be abducted. And it happened to just turn to a page in the book where it talked about a woman named Abby and a woman named Nona. As I'm reading it, I just happened to be guided to those pages. And in the pages, Nona, I forget which one said which, but they both had this experience. They were mothers, and these angry, quote, angry aliens had come into their rooms, and each is just independently reporting, they weren't together. And say, for Abby, as soon as the alien came in, she called on Christ. And as soon as she called on Christ, the entity seemed to double over in pain and almost scream, and then dash down through the room she was in and out the wall. So it could pass through the wall. It looked solid, but it could pass through the wall. And for the other woman, she said the same thing. There were these angry aliens, and they were sending thoughts of like wanting to harm her children if she didn't cooperate with whatever they wanted her to do. In both cases, either woman. And so what happened was she began to send thoughts of love. For some reason, this came to her to do to this alien. And as she did, it doubled over as if in pain, and then stood up and shot down through the room. She was in and out the wall. Now, the difference with her experience, she described in the exact wording that I had used. I felt like the molecules in my body were changing, as if to prepare to levitate. She didn't say the levitating part, but she said it was as if the molecules in my body were changing. So that to me felt like a final exam for my finishing the intermediate training for Baldwin's spirit releasement therapy, where you're releasing these unseen attachments in the energy field of the person. Then that a few months later, I was preparing to go on my first trip to study with the Mayan shamans, after having discovered that my Reiki teacher, was going to lead a trip, and that in fact she was Mayan herself, and she was originally from Guatemala, but she had been living in the States and teaching school for the last 18 years. So that night before leaving on the trip, I had a full day of my practice seeing patients, and it's 10 o'clock at night. I just flipped the light off in my room, and suddenly, all around me were like these pillars of greenish light from floor to ceiling, which again was about an 8-foot ceiling in my Connecticut home. And it formed like 12 columns around me, and one was behind me, and that wall connected right with the hallway. And it was as if I felt something stand through the wall, and I began to feel like, as I was lying on the bed, radiating. Now, keep in mind, I wasn't in a deep sleep. There were no drugs involved. There was no mind-altering substances. I was just flipping the light off to go to sleep, and I was wide awake. And this appearance of these columns of greenish light that then coalesced into what seemed to be a head with eyes in each case, almost like if you could imagine like a neon sign tubes forming, almost like stick figure in that sense, but they weren't. But that's kind of the best way I could describe it. So they had some sort of anthropomorphic human type shape, but they were huge, and not your usual kind of the way that a human being's shape and form would be. It was much more elongated. And one came down toward me, and again, telepathically, there wasn't any words or anything. He put his hand out to me and he said, "Welcome back to the Brotherhood." And that was that. It lasted for like a couple minutes, just, and I feel like I'm just on the bed, just in this pleasant, radiating feeling, almost like I felt with that experience of the Holy Spirit, months earlier, hitting me in the third eye and radiating up and down my body. Now, I was a psychologist. I had dreams, and I had helped people analyze their dreams, but I hadn't had any visions or anything like this, seeing something in this imaginal realm, this dimension in between the physical realm and unseen other dimensions. And so it happened not like a dream, which seems to be from the inside out. It happened what it felt like from the outside in. And that's the distinction I made between visions. So, okay, that ended. I go on the trip and to study with the Mayans. And I had some other experiences while I was down there. But one of the things that my teacher told me, that when we were in a circle on the beach in Cancun, before we went down to Chichen Itza, the site we were going to, the first site we were going to, with the Mayan shamans. In the circle, each of us, took a moment, and we all had our eyes closed, but we had a sense of when we were to move into the center of the circle and receive some energy from everybody in the circle. And so the teacher, after it was over with, she said, "I had this experience of suddenly when one of you moved into the center circle, I felt this huge energy, and I felt what it seemed to me that the person that was in the center circle had been a Mayan healer in the past, and I felt this energy like an ascended Mayan. One of the teachers had appeared, and when she opened her eyes, she told me that it was me, and that she said I had had a past life as a Mayan healer, and I had had one in Egypt too as an Egyptian healer, and I was back now and could perform healings again. Now, I don't have any, I've had other past life kind of recollections, but I don't have any immediate sense of that. I didn't have an experience of it. I was just told that. So the idea that they said, "Welcome back to the Brotherhood," and I told her about that, that's what she said. So you were, among those Mayan teachers, quote, masters who had ascended, in the past. So I said, okay, well, whatever. I just know it was an incredible experience, and the energy that I felt was something. So again, we went through experiences of uniting male and female energy, various exercises under the great palapas. I did a couple of Reiki healings, and my teacher said she saw a shaft of light going up from the top of my head all the way to 20 feet above into the top of the palapa. All this was new to me, and I was just going with the flow. So when I got home, I flew into Boston, and then rode back to my Connecticut home, about a 2-hour ride. Got home, it's about 3 a.m. I turned the lights out. Again, not dreaming, no altering substances, mind-altering substances. I flipped the light off, and bing, shoo, there they are again. Only this time, there's an additional figure who's a little female. The others seem all like males. This seemed like a little female with a kind of a headdress on. And that lasted again for a few minutes, and then that was it. So my trip was bookended by these green light beings that my teacher was saying were related to the beings the Mayan talked about, who were descended from the stars, and who came down and brought the Maya their astronomy, their mathematics. And in fact, on that another trip I had down there to talk with the head Mayan shaman, Don Cirillo, and to participate in some sacred fire ceremonies with him, he had said that these beings from the Pleiadian star system had come to Earth and had brought this technology and knowledge to the Maya. And so when I was down there, I happened to see that he was being invited on, there was a plaque up there, or rather a glassed-in article framed, that fall Don Cirillo was to talk to Harvard, the religious studies program, about the Maya spirituality. And he was also invited to NASA to talk about the astronomy and mathematics and so forth, all of which was oral, handed down. And yet their precision measurements of like where stars are and their heavenly orbits and so forth, and their information was more precise in some ways than NASA's. And so that was interesting. Now, flash ahead. In the book where a lot of this is detailed is a book called that I wrote called A Matter of Love, and you see it in the link below. And it's more detailed what I'm telling you now. But in it, one of the things it talked about was I was writing a chapter, and I just had typed out that afternoon. The Maya believed that they were descended from the stars, and that star beings had brought them their mathematics and their astronomy and their basic, sense of that, their science, basically. I finished typing that. I kicked back to rest in an afternoon, a Saturday afternoon. I just flipped on the TV for a minute, and as soon as I flipped it on, it was the History Channel, and the very words that I just typed in my book, A Matter of Love, were these. The Maya, like many indigenous people, believed that they were descended from the stars and that the star beings had brought them their mathematics, their astronomy, etc. The chances of that synchronicity is pretty wild. So, again, this is a wild ride that I'm taking you on, and I'm just taking you from that initial experience in that fall of 1995 to this in the early days or months of the next year in 96, going from like February to June. These were the things that happened. Nothing like this had ever happened to me before. And so I began to really wonder and open up to what was possible and what all this might mean. Now, as I was preparing to talk to you today, a friend emailed me a link to a YouTube presentation by Dr. Stephen Greer, who's the founder of the Center for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And now, remember, we've been talking about like a greater intelligence, that vaster intelligence that beats your heart and digests your food, and how we can get our minds get crammed with early memories and conditioning where we block our access to that greater intelligence. It doesn't come in the form of thoughts, but inspiration that may lead us to certain thoughts and certain actions. And so that, as Dr. Hugh Lin, we've been talking about, says, when we either live from memory or inspiration, and we want to clear out those kind of idiosyncratic memories that lead us to react in habitual patterns that aren't always productive. So here I was beginning to contact another dimension just because the training with Dr. Baldwin and the experiences had begun to clear out some of my being reactive to memory and allowing for a higher power, a greater intelligence to come in. And one last thing, when I was writing my first book, 8 Steps to Love, and I was writing about 4 steps, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, you can take in the face of stress. The spiritual step, when I was writing that chapter, I was mentioning how Herbert Benson, Dr. Benson at Harvard, had said that those people who had a sense of and kept open to the idea that there was a power greater than themselves that they could access through prayer and so forth, had better health than those people who didn't have that access or didn't have that belief. So, a lot to take in, but something to reflect on, and please feel free to check out Dr. Greer's message about what the Maya call our space brothers and sisters, and what black elk, and I mention him in my book and reference some things, called the Star Nation people. And black elk was also known to have said the reason the scientists don't always find or get the evidence, although now the evidence is coming out about extraterrestrial intelligence and the government's acknowledging it and so forth. Now, Dr. Greer mentions what the agenda might be for our government to now let it out and why they've hidden it for years. But anyway, that's something you can check out. Let me see, what was I going to say? So Dr. Greer is elaborating something, but what I was going to mention is that the idea that at some point now we're on the verge, according to Jose Arguelles, who's also mentioned in my book, he said that we're at a level where now we're going to be expanding to like an interplanetary, intergalactic civilization. We're on the verge of that. And what Black Elk said, that the scientists, the reason they didn't get the information about extraterrestrials very easily is because he said the Star Nation people, the Space Brothers and Sisters, toy with the scientists because the scientists have the wrong attitude, according to Black Elk. They want to shoot it down and dissect it, which is what I discovered when I talked to a microbiologist just a few months after my experience and had told her about the Gulf War syndrome and so forth. We discussed that. We discussed the X-Files movie. And she said that she had been flown out to an area and they were blindfolded in one state and flown into another state, which was Area 51, with all that talk about the UFOs and the government cover-up. And she said she was also flown in. They were microbiologists doing some kind of soil samples and different samples they were getting in those areas. And they were also sent to what was called Operation Deep Freeze. And there, somebody had kind of wandered off and seen something, of a creature encased in the ice. And in the one in Area 51, one of the microbiologists had wandered off to another floor and saw what he heard was called an EBE, an extraterrestrial biological entity, lying on a table, and they were examining it. Presumably it was dead. So anyway, as I mentioned last week, I misquoted it, but the quote was, so we can conclude with Shakespeare's comment, there are more things on heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio. And that's what was happening to me in that time period. So I hope you have a great week, and I'll talk to you next week.